Huangdi was the first man. Now, Huangdi makes no sense unless you read Genesis, because Huangdi is made up of two characters, the garden and a noble man. Why would they have a garden? What's a garden got to do with a man? But if it's the first man, Adam, who was created in the Garden of Eden, suddenly it makes sense. Naked, again. I don't know about you, but whenever I see fruit, I just have this passionate drive to rip off all my clothes and run around naked. Okay, I'm only kidding. I don't really do that, honest, okay? But you can see what I'm getting at here. What on earth does fruit have to do with nakedness? But if the man ate the fruit and suddenly realized his nakedness, as it says in Genesis, once again, it makes sense. It lines up with the Genesis account. So once again, the Chinese characters make sense. Now get a load of this. Vessel, or ship, basically. So vessel plus 8 plus mouths adds up to boat. Why 8? How many people were on the Ark of Noah? 8 people. They were on a vessel, so there was 8 mouths on board a vessel. That is the word for boat. Why 8? Why so specific? But again, in the light of Genesis and the historical accounts within it, it makes sense. Now, this is very interesting. Trinity, or 3, notice it's 3 crosses, basically. The Trinity, or 3 persons, equals a moral pattern. That's kind of interesting. Moral pattern plus the tree plus the fuel for sacrifice equals Shangdi. If we sacrifice the Trinity on a tree, we get Shangdi, whom I would suggest to you is Jesus Christ. And there's actually a book written, Eternity in Their Hearts is the name of it. And the whole point of the book is missionary account of missionary account after missionary account of these missionaries who discovered that the gospel message was preserved in even the most remote tribes in the jungles. In other words, every culture has within it preserved the gospel message. I would suggest to you the Chinese are no exception, that it has been preserved in their original characters, which sadly they're right now trying to get rid of because it's such an archaic language. I can understand, but unfortunately, they're going to lose the gospel message preserved in their culture. Now, the Maya peoples are one of the tribes of the Chinese, if you will. And get a load of this. This is something that they recite at weddings, funerals, birthdays, celebrations, etc. This has been translated. This is on the ICR website. Again, this poetry has been around literally for thousands of years. It predates Christ by at least 1,000 years. So get a load of what they say at every funeral, wedding, etc. On the day God created the heavens and earth, on that day he opened the gateway of light. In the earth, then he made heaps of earth and of stone. In the sky he made bodies, the sun and the moon. In the earth he created the hawk and the kite. In the water he created the lobster and fish. In the wilderness he made the tiger and bear. Made verdure to cover the mountains, made forest extend with the ranges, made the light green cane, made the rank bamboo. It goes on. On the earth he created a man from the dirt. Of the man thus created, a woman he formed. Then the patriarch Dirt made a balance of stones, estimated the weight of the earth to the bottom, calculated the bulk of the heavenly bodies, and pondered the ways of the deity God. The patriarch Dirt begat patriarch Sita. The patriarch Sita begat a son Lusu, and Lusu begat Galo, and he begat Lama. Again, you can go through the genealogies of the Bible on your own, and you can see the similarities between the names. The patriarch Lamma begat the man Nuah. G. Recognize this? And his wife was the matriarch Gaboluine. By the way, this is one of the names, one of the pronunciations of the name Gwendolyn. It's also where we get the name queen, or the word queen, in our English language. So you'll notice Noah's wife is where we get, her name is where we get the name for the word queen. Very interesting. Their sons were, get this, Lohan, Loshen, and Jehu. Sounds awful similar to Ham, Shem, and Japheth, doesn't it? The earth began filling with tribes and families. Creation was shared by the clans and the peoples. These did not God's will, nor returned his affection, but fought with each other, defying the Godhead. Their leaders shook fists in the face of the mighty. Then the earth was convulsed to the depth of 3 strata, rending the air to the uttermost heaven. God's anger arose till his being was changed. His wrath flaring up filled his eyes and his face, until he must come and demolish humanity, come and destroy a whole world full of people. You'd swear this was straight out of the scriptures. So it poured 40 days in sheets and torrents, then 55 days of misting and drizzle. The waters surmounted the mountains and ranges. The deluge ascending left valley and hollow, an earth with no earth upon which to take refuge, a world with no foothold where one might subsist. The people were baffled, impotent, and ruined, despairing, horror-stricken, diminished, and finished. But the patriarch Nuah was righteous. The matriarch Gaboluine upright, built a boat very wide, made a ship very vast. Their household entire got aboard and were floated. The family complete rode the deluge in safety. The animals with him were female and male. The birds went along and were mated in pairs. When the time was fulfilled, God commanded the waters. The day arrived. The floodwaters receded. Then Nuah liberated a dove from their refuge, sent a bird to go forth and bring again tidings. The flood had gone down into lake and to ocean. The mud was confined to the pools and hollows. There was land once again where a man might reside. There was a place in the earth now to rear habitations. Buffalo then were brought, an oblation to God. Fatter cattle became sacrificed to the mighty. What did Noah do when he got off the ark? Made a sacrifice. You'd swear this was straight out of Genesis. The divine one gave them his blessing. Their God bestowed his good graces. By the way, there are over 250 cultures around the world that have historical record, legend, or myth of a global flood that once overtook the world. This is only one of well over 250 around the world. And look how specific it is. You'd swear it was straight out of Genesis. But we're not finished yet. And by the way, I left most of this out, okay? If you go to the ICR website, you can read the whole thing yourself. It's really impressive. But again, remembering one of the major events in Earth's history, the Tower of Babel. That's key. Lohan begot Cusa and Meseh. Loshan begot Elan and Ngashur. I don't know how to say that. Their offspring begotten became tribes and peoples. Their descendants established encampments and cities. Their singing was all with the same tunes and music. Their speaking was all with the same words and language. Interesting. Then they said, let us build us a very big city. Let us raise unto heaven a very high tower. This was wrong, but they reached this decision. Not right, but they rashly persisted. God struck at them, changed their language and accent. Ascending in wrath, he confused tones and voices. One speech to the others who hear him has no meaning. He's speaking in words, but they can't understand him. So the city builded was never completed. The tower they wrought has to stand unfinished. In despair, then they separate under the heaven. They part from each other the globe to encircle. They arrive at 6 corners and speak the 6 languages. Interesting. Okay, now, the question arises, again, bearing in mind this is all a major part of the Chinese culture. And there were some wise men who showed up a couple of years after Christ was born. Where did they come from? The East. Wise men from the East. Now, Confucius, we've all heard about. I knew very little about him until recently. I want to get into learning more about him because he's a fascinating man. And he has passed on various traditions which have now gotten basically warped or perverted into different modern religions. But the original form is quite interesting, and the things that Confucius and his buddies were getting into was really interesting stuff. But get a load of this. Mencius, who was the teacher of Confucius, made a prophecy. He said, from Yao to Shun, down to Tang, were 500 years or more. These are major kings of the Chinese culture. From Tang to King Wen, there were 500 years and more. From King Wen to Confucius were 500 years and more. The king should arise in the course of 500 years. Wonder what king he was talking about. Get a load of this. Here's where it starts. Here's where it ends. Right about the time of Christ. It's as if Mencius prophesied Jesus Christ, the king. But it gets better than that. Get a load of what Confucius said. If truly a king were to arise, it would still require 30 years for his love to be manifested. Boy, is that precise or what? What were these guys, what kind of revelation were these guys walking in? Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to what happened with Daniel after Babylon. Some have suggested he went to the east. Hey, possibly. And maybe that is where all of this came from. Perhaps someone in ancient Chinese culture turned out to be Daniel. I don't know. That's part of research. This has actually been researched by other creationists, and I wanted to share more with you, but I just didn't have time to research up on it. So we'll just have to get together and do this again next year, okay? And we'll hopefully have more to share then. But I would just encourage you to look into this yourself and study it, see what the scriptures say, see what the Chinese cultures say. Just bear in mind, it's not the Bible. That's all. This was the cover of Discover magazine a couple of years back. Has the profound statement, or question should I say, where did everything come from? And then it actually shows the universe, actual size, at 10 to minus 34 seconds. Looks really impressive. Get a load of this. I love this. The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero. Nada. And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. How is that possible? Oh, just ask Alan Guth. His theory of inflation helps explain everything. Well, gee, why don't we ask God? No, that's not allowed. But Alan, he must know. Sure. Okay. So the principle, of course, here, number one, the ridiculous amounts of blind faith involved here. The universe, of course, has been proposed to start from a small pinpoint, exploding into the current universe we have now. There are many problems with that. And Angie, Angus, and Angela are going to show us some of those problems with their adventures in angular momentum. Now, angular momentum is simply a fancy high-tech word for rotation, okay? And you know how things, once they are moving, once you have motion, they're hard to stop. They resist stopping or resist forces. Angular momentum is the same thing. Once something is rotating, it doesn't want to stop rotating. It's got an angular momentum. So, Angie, Angus, and Angela headed down to the playground and running around on the nice merry-go-round. They don't have those too many more in parks anymore. I think people were getting hurt with them too much or something. I don't know. Which is too bad, because they're great for demonstrating scientific experiments like this. So a couple of bullies came along, and they decided they wanted to play too. So they came along, and they grabbed the merry-go-round, and they spun it faster and faster and faster until it was all Angie, Angus, and Angela could do to hold on. And their arms or their legs were sticking straight out from the centrifugal force. But the bullies spun it faster still, and Angie, Angus, and Angela could no longer hold on. And they went flying through the air. Now, if you were to pay close attention to Angie, Angus, and Angela, you would notice several things. See, this is good science. Observation. You would observe that they rotate in the same direction as the merry-go-round that they left. They conserved the angular momentum. The other observation you would make was that they would travel in a straight line, away from the center of the object they were rotating on. So they travel in a straight line, rotating in the same direction until they meet a resistance, such as a tree or telephone pole or passing bus. And so the principle here is everything, if everything exploded from one pinpoint, everything should rotate in the same direction. Interestingly, that is not what we see. In our own solar system alone, we have planets that rotate the opposite direction of all the other planets: Venus, Uranus, and Pluto. Some of these planets have moons orbiting in both directions. All the moons should orbit and rotate in the same directions. Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune all have moons orbiting in both directions. Major problem for the Big Bang Theory. Now, we also see things like galaxies, etc. This is Stephan's quintet. Stephan's quintet is composed of 5 different galaxies. 3 out of the 5 are rotating opposite of the other 2. So again, all the galaxies should rotate in the same direction. They do not. In fact, a couple of years ago, this interesting article came out. Goofy galaxy spins in the wrong direction. Let's take a look at that galaxy. Here's the galaxy. What we're going to do is we're going to start at this point here. Now the arms, the direction the arms go in, tell us which direction the galaxy is rotating. If the arms are rotating in a counterclockwise direction, we start there and we go counterclockwise. The arms are radiating out. That means the galaxy is rotating clockwise. The problem is if we start here and follow the arms go clockwise, meaning the galaxy is also rotating counterclockwise at the same time. That galaxy is rotating in both directions simultaneously. And they came up with all kinds of wonderful ideas. Oh, it was a galaxy that got sucked into another and they were rotating in opposite directions or something. Really don't have an explanation. But once again, Big Bang Theory has a problem because of the conservation of angular momentum. It doesn't stack up. Now, the universe is often presented as excellent evidence that the universe and Earth is old, too old for the Bible. Let's take a wander through our universe, see what we see. Of course, you all know that planet. Good. You passed the test. Okay. Planet Saturn has these beautiful rings around them. Those rings are composed of ice chunks. Big ones, small ones, medium-sized ones. The thing is, if those rings were any older than 10,000 years old, all those ice chunks should be the same size. They should have homogenized from bouncing off each other into the same size. They're not. That indicates the rings are young. Furthermore, the flyby with, I've forgotten the name of the, Cassini, that was it. The Cassini pass, which happened just a couple of years ago, found that there was no dust on the rings. Again, another indicator those rings are young, less than 10,000 years old. Now, of course, the implication, some might suggest that this has nothing to do with the age of the planet. I would suggest that it does. The implication is that the rings were formed at the same time as the planet. Why? Because it's essentially impossible to capture ice in orbit. For example, here is Comet Shoemaker-Levy. Now, this was way back in 1994. I do remember this because I was working at a science camp, and the owner of the camp is a big astronomy buff, and we were watching. This is when the internet was just becoming of age, really. And we watched this both on TV and online carefully because what happened was this comet, Shoemaker-Levy, got trapped in orbit around Jupiter. And as it was sucked into the orbit of Jupiter, it actually ripped the comet apart. So I want to show to you just how difficult it is to capture something in orbit. And if you don't believe me that it's difficult to capture something in orbit, just ask NASA. Does anybody remember the Mars lander a few years ago? Oops, did you say 10 meters or 10 miles? Do you remember that mistake? They had a metric conversion, and they wound up crashing one of their Mars explorers because of the metric conversion thing. They have to be very, very precise in how they put something into orbit. It's very difficult to put something into orbit. It takes hard work. In this case, Shoemaker-Levy gets ripped apart and slammed into the planet. Believe it or not, that explosion right there, the shockwave from the explosion is about the size of planet Earth. It was big. It was a big comet. It was a big explosion. Again, it's impossible to capture something in orbit. The rings could not have just been easily captured. Furthermore, when we take another close look, the rings are labeled inside to outside, A, B, C, D, F, G, etc. the F ring on the very outside, notice there are multiple rings and they actually rotate around each other as they orbit the planet. There's a couple of nifty explanations as to how it stays that way, but nobody's been able to explain how it got that way. May I suggest to you that as you look at a painting and you see the signature of the artist, may I suggest to you that is an incredible work of art, and we're looking at the signature of the artist. Again, all indicators that it's young, not old. The universe, the very word itself, implies everything I'm trying to say. It is a single spoken sentence. God spoke it into existence, and it was. It was a universe. Now, coming back to planet Earth, I know I've flogged that fossil equine quite a bit, but another point, major point here, with relation to Earth's age, has been the age of Earth's electromagnetic field. Now, Dr. Russ Humphreys, this was first shown by Dr. Thomas Barnes, who is now the late Dr. Thomas Barnes. Dr. Humphreys took it a little farther and actually carried on the research with ancient pottery, things that we can date precisely, and that preserve the Earth's magnetic field, so we have a reference point. Well, as we go back in time, we found that Earth's magnetic field has actually been decaying at roughly a half-life of 1,400 years. What he also found out was very interesting. At the time of Christ, there was an increase in the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Profound. Before that, a whole pile of fluctuations, possibly even reversals, and then from there on back, we really don't know. We have to extrapolate. But the point is this. Earth's magnetic field is young. Even if we go back with 1,400-year half-life, if you go back a mere 10,000 years, the Earth's electromagnetic field gets so strong that it's impossible for life to exist. Or, 20,000 years. Sorry, my mistake. At any rate, the farther you go back in time, the worse the problem becomes. You can't have deep time on planet Earth. Now, what about the speed of light? This is one I get asked about a lot. The problem is presented as such. We have stars that we know, through various methods, are hundreds of millions of light years away. In other words, it will take the light from that star hundreds of millions of years to get here to planet Earth. We see them, so the light has been traveling for at least 100 million years. That's way too long for the Bible. Oh, your Bible can't possibly be true, because the universe is too old. Well, there's a couple problems with that. First of all, what they don't tell you, the speed of light problem is also a problem for the Big Bang. For example, the cosmic microwave background is uniform. Now, this is kind of technical. I won't go into big details. You can look it up for yourself. Suffice it to say this. Because it's uniform throughout the universe, there has to have been an energy exchange throughout the whole universe from one end to the other. That energy exchange can only happen at the speed of light. We don't have enough time. Even with the Big Bang, there's not been enough time. Even with a 20-billion-year-old universe, there's not enough time to exchange that energy to make it all uniform. Something is up there. Secondly, if the Big Bang has occurred, you must have matter exceeding the speed of light, because everything started at one point and exploded to where it is now. And they come up with all kinds of hypotheses as to account for that. But again, the speed of light issue is not just applying to the young Earth. It also applies to the old Earth and old universe. It causes problems for them as well. Now, there are several creationist propositions to explain the speed of light problem, if you will. The first one is C decay. C, of course, you may recognize it from Einstein's work, E equals mc squared. C is the speed of light. So in this case, C is slowing down or decaying. It's the decay of the speed of light, so better known as C decay. Put forward by Barry Setterfield, a phenomenal piece of work. The thing is, the moment you decay or slow down the speed of light or speed it up, you affect all kinds of other nuclear constants. The speed of radioactive decay, for instance, increases. Wait a minute. A couple classes ago, we talked about the possibility that radioactive decays have been faster in the past, didn't we? In fact, we saw good evidence that that is precisely what happened. Maybe this warrants more observation and more study. But at any rate, if you accelerate the speed of light in the past, this may explain light from distant planets and stars getting here within the 6,000 years. Also, with Einstein's model of E equals mc squared, there's a couple of interesting things here. Time is not a constant. Now, this has actually been scientifically proven. Clocks on top of mountains ran faster than clocks, say, down in Death Valley. What? Yeah, seriously. Gravity affects time. That's at least the way it appears. Also, the whole principle of Einstein's E equals mc squared theory was that motion also affects time. Stars and planets are supposed to be moving. We don't know how much, how fast, or any of that. We don't know how fast we're moving relative to them, for example. Everything is in motion. Gravity changes throughout the universe. All of this affects time. So even though the speed of light, assuming it is constant, I don't think it is, and I think more and more people are accepting that now. Even if the speed of light was a constant, if time is not a constant, that throws a whole huge monkey wrench into the whole thing. And that can also play a role in explaining how light got here in such a short amount of time. And this brings us to Dr. Russ Humphrey's white hole cosmology. If you want to follow up on it, there's an older book called Starlight and Time, which is sort of the layman's version of his model, which does quite nicely explain how light from distant stars and planets can get here in 6,000 years. One last point before we move on. The redshift was originally used to be an evidence that the universe is expanding. You know how if you're standing at a railroad crossing, as the train approaches with its horn blaring, the tone changes from higher to lower as it goes past? Same thing. Motion also changes the color of light for the same reasons. It's called the Doppler effect. And so when we look out into the universe, everything tended to shift towards the red end of the spectrum, implying that everything is expanding away from each other. We now know that that's not the case. Light actually tires and shifts to the red just by simply traveling. We now know that. So the redshift doesn't necessarily imply, although it may imply the universe is expanding, it doesn't necessarily imply the universe is expanding. So the redshift doesn't necessarily support the Big Bang model either. The first cause is the Creator God. And when you look at the universe around you, not only do we see evidence of that Creator God, we see the character and nature of that Creator God, the Lord Jesus Christ. The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient in intelligence. The first cause of consciousness must be personal. Ooh.